To celebrate 30 years and show my own personal appreciation of Psytronik Software, I have produced what is going to be a series of videos looking at the worst and best games of what they have produced since the beginnings back in 1993. Of course, Psytronik came to be what it is through Jason McKenzie and John Wells, at which time C64 fans had moved on to other systems which were dominating the market, such as the Super NES or the Sega Mega Drive. The first releases from Psytronik then surprisingly wasn't too successful given C64's declining audience, and early games that were mail-ordered direct from Psytronik were literally a do-it-yourself look, which Jason later on went to admit that it was a simple case of using Prickstick. Jason, who still runs Psytronik today, loved the quality packaging of Psygnosis games, which is understandable, but loved the prices of the budget Mastronic games too. A fusion of both created Psytronik. Being a huge Commodore 64 fan myself and having published myself very briefly in the past, I see that this is a love for the hobby with little to no returning profits. It keeps the C64 alive here in 2023, and it also keeps people like myself happy playing new releases for hardware that originally released back in 1982. I am making these videos to celebrate 30 years of Psytronik then. These videos will feature no compilations nor Thalamus or Apex games that Psytronik later republished, such as Creatures and Mayhem in Monsterland. These videos will only feature standalone games that were sold as one game. We are starting off this video from the eras of 1993 to 2012. For this first part, I have matched these together with the lowest and highest scores that Lemon 64 users have voted these games on. 1000 Kung Fu Maniacs is a game created with Shuck, that's Shoot 'em Up construction kit. This one is a fairly early attempt at perfecting the art of Shuck that the coder is well known for. Shuck games are traditionally hit or miss, and C64 games generally know what to expect with games created with this software and its limitation it comes with. 1000 Kung Fu Maniacs is a side-scrolling shoot-em-up, beat-em-up, in which our protagonist is out to hunt for his toy robot from the mean boys of Blapsville. The game has been criticised for what it is, including a review talking about a ninja on a skateboard. I would argue that this was likely a modern response to all those ninja games in the 1980s that featured absurd ninja ideas. BMX Ninja, for example. Overall, Lemon votes this game at just 3%. The premise of Psychozone is very simple: speed in your motorbike and shoot down enemies whilst collecting points along the way. Originally set for a 1994 release, Psychozone was enhanced for its 2008 release, and it's not actually that bad, although pretty repetitive after 10 minutes of playing it. The aim of the game is to reach the Pacific Ocean whilst combating various dangerous enemies in what is known as Psychozone. Clearly inspired by the classic Spy Hunter, Psychozone earned itself a 4% by Lemoners. Now, I do think I mentioned in the past I am not the greatest in terms of puzzle games, and Oracle 3 to me is a big challenge of a game. I last played this one near its release when I bought it on physical disc when it released. The aim of the game is to clear each of the 32 levels by pushing blocks to match up 2 or more squares. I recall originally getting the idea of this and managed to get around halfway through Oracle 3. If you are a fan of puzzlers with pretty and colourful graphics with some very nice SID chip music, this game is likely for you. It scores 5% over at Lemon 64. This 2011 Snake-inspired puzzler scores 5.5%. The idea behind Hyper Viper is to gobble up the snakes that travel around the mazes. By eating a snake from the middle, we'll shatter the snake into two halves. It's a simple game that is pretty fun to play, especially if you miss the days of the Nokia 3310 Snake game. That still to this day manages to impress me that mobile phones once had a built-in game. As the game progresses, so do the mazes, and trust me, this can be very overwhelming on the eye. Give this one a go. Next up, we have our first traditional style weird C64 game that reminds me of the rather bizarre Mutant Camels. Here is a brief story of Sheepoid. A nightmare has just begun. The neon vortex is under attack from strange and bizarre psychedelic experiences from outer space. We have transported 2 micro sheep to fight against the neon vortex invaders. Sheepoid is also based on the classic Laser Zone, so fans of that game will likely enjoy this one too. I had a blast playing this game, which I haven't touched since its original release. It's very enjoyable and the control mechanics are very clever too. Just don't harm the sheeps. 6.3% is a good score for this modern day classic. Sub Hunter is a basic shoot 'em up title with varying stages. The goal is to save swimmers from mutant fish as well as enemy submarines. Visually, Sub Hunter looks great with its visuals and very impressive multi-layered parallax scrolling. Some of the best I have seen on the Commodore 64 in fact. I spent a good 20 minutes with this one, at which point I had to stop to continue editing. This is a classic and anybody new to modern C64 games definitely needs to try this one out. 6.11% is a modest score for Sub Hunter. This was Psytronik's first ever release from back in 1993. This was actually a port of a ZX Spectrum game originally. Skepta of Baghdad is also responsible for kickstarting Psytronik as we know it and love it today. John Wells, who coded this port, wanted it to have a full release. Jason McKenzie approached John, and this is how you are watching this video I put together today. Regardless of if the C64 was fading out back in 1993, there was still an audience like there is today for it. I remember playing this game on a Commodore format cover tape back in the day. It is a fun mixture of platform with puzzler elements in mind and very familiar with other Specky games of that era. This scores 6.94%, although considering its impact within a homebrew context, this game should have been ranked at 10% for that alone. In Escape from Earth, you take control of either Votto or Veti, who are cyborgs. The objective is to blast your way out of Earth, destroying robots along the journey, as well as ultimately looking for switches to deactivate generators to expand the world more for you. Admittedly, I spent too long playing this one and actually forgotten what a great game it is. It looks sharp and generally very addictive too. In addition to excellent gameplay, Escape from Earth also includes an excellent soundtrack by Richard Bayliss and Freezoik. This is another early game from 1994. When this was re-released by Psytronik back in 2008, we received an excellent enhanced version, and it plays so well too. 7% from Lemon Community. From the opening sequence, Wanted, The Wild Bunch really does set the scene with some atmospheric and reminiscent music of spaghetti western films, which sounds awesome. Gameplay wise, Wanted is a mashup of different genres. On one hand, it plays as a very basic RPG, which requires you to make decisions which will impact your progression of the game. Expect Wild West fights, gambling, and generally everything else from a Wild West film. Since its release back in 2009, voters have voted Wanted, The Wild Bunch, a 7%. Get 'em was a game that originally entered into an RGCD cartridge competition back in 2011. Psytronik and RGCD joined forces to get this gem published with box art and ultimately into physical release, which features enhancements, and thus Get 'em DX was born. I had this one for Christmas originally, in which I worked a Christmas night. Get 'em DX came with me that night, and my C64 did too. Did I really just tell you that? Doesn't matter, that job went years back now. Get 'em DX, anyways, is a nice cutesy little maze puzzler, where collecting everything on screen will release a key in which you can use to unlock the door once it appears. Did I mention that this is a 2-player co-op too, and features the use of a crossbow? It has collectively scored a 7.25%. I never really appreciated Transector until playing it again last night. The story goes like this. An intergalactic threat posed by a planet far away, and so Earth deploys a team to this faraway planet to destroy its production of nuclear pods, which are built in a facility known as Transector. If you enjoy a heavy Sid Chip dance-inspired beat whilst having your eyes go mental with a constant parallax effect, whilst watching baddies move in at you, then Transector is an arcade collector up for you. This is a seriously decent game which doesn't get much attention. 8% is the score from Lemoners. I remember waiting for Solus to release at the time, and it seemed like the next best thing next to Night and Grail, which is also a Metroidvania style game. Solus has been described as a Dracona style game, which leaves you unarmed throughout and will have you searching for treasures in sometimes explosions, which causes enemy sprites to blow up. Solus is a massive game and features the best of the best who developed it at the time, that being Endorion, Myla and Encore. For those of you who are aware of modern C64 games, those names will be familiar to you. To cut a long story short, you have lost your soul and it's your task to retrieve it. Absolutely recommended for fans of this genre. Now, I'm not going to lie, Nightingale saw me back into the Commodore 64 around 2011. I have no idea how I stumbled across it, but I was blown away at the time that new games were being produced. Not so many as today, of course. At the time, Psytronik didn't have many games on offer like today either. As I was just saying about Soulless, Nightingale was a Metroidvania style game and totally pulls you in. You can upgrade weapons and armour along the way, as well as use a spacebar to access a map to find your way around over 200 screens. The aim of the game is to find the Grail and to battle baddies along the way, as well as fight bosses. Visually stunning as well as its sprite designs, the music also fits very well into the game. Personally, I believe this game is worth at least 10%, but the Lemoners voted collectively for an 8.54% for Nightingale. And for this first part of this series, our winner of the Lemon 64 voters goes to Joe Gunn. Released back in 2009 by the ever awesome Endorian who coded it. So clearly it's a tribute to Indiana Jones, hence the theme from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and hence its gameplay, which sees you wander around different rooms, solving puzzles in an unknown pyramid, looking to solve a mystery and thus escape alive from the dangers that lurk inside. Joe Gunn is regarded as one of the best games to come out from Psytronik, and it's definitely worth a download if you haven't tried it. Since its 2009 release, Joe Gunn has reached a voter score of 8.62%. To celebrate 30 years and show my own personal appreciation of Psytronik Software, I have produced what is going to be a series of videos looking at the worst and best games of what they have produced since the beginnings back in 1993. Of course, Psytronik came to be what it is through Jason McKenzie and John Wells, at which time C64 fans had moved on to other systems which were dominating the market, such as the Super NES or the Sega Mega Drive. The first releases from Psytronik then surprisingly wasn't too successful given C64's declining audience, and early games that were mail-ordered direct from Psytronik were literally a do-it-yourself look, which Jason later on went to admit that it was a simple case of using Prickstick. Jason, who still runs Psytronik today, loved the quality packaging of Psygnosis games, which is understandable, but loved the prices of the budget Mastronic games too. A fusion of both created Psytronik. Being a huge Commodore 64 fan myself and having published myself very briefly in the past, I see that this is a love for the hobby with little to no returning profits. It keeps the C64 alive here in 2023, and it also keeps people like myself happy playing new releases for hardware that originally released back in 1982. I am making these videos to celebrate 30 years of Psytronik then. These videos will feature no compilations nor Thalamus or Apex games that Psytronik later republished, such as Creatures and Mayhem in Monsterland. These videos will only feature standalone games that were sold as one game. I remember when Wayne, who designed this game, was on Lemon 64 really excited and telling the community that Psytronik was publishing it for him. It was Wayne's ambition to do something like this, and he did it with Richard Bayliss coding it. Unfortunately, Honeybee wasn't that great really, or simply I don't know how to play it, which I don't as per gameplay footage. Visually it's not that bad, and it's just very basic by the seams of it, almost designed in an early C64 era style, which is great if you like that era of C64 games. 4.75% is what Honeybee earned on Lemon 64. An ambitious project that Story and Volkers worked on, a very different genre too for the Commodore 64. It's a mixture of RPG built into a 3D world. Problem is with Argos is its perspective, and very easy to get lost as everything seems similar, and it is difficult to judge where you are and where you haven't been in the game. The stylish artwork is reminiscent to particular Psygnosis games, which is a winner for me. Who didn't like the Psygnosis artwork after all? As a Lemon user commented, it's the same thing, room after room. A factor of variation could have implemented to make Argos much better. It scores 5.33% over on Lemon 64. The Sky is Falling is a fairly simple game to play. The character runs to the right hand side of the screen and then repeats itself by emerging from the left again whilst the rock is chasing after you. The objective is not to get crushed by the collapsing sky, so shoot up to destroy the pointed rocks which are coming down on you gradually. Once that has been achieved, the next goal is to shoot upwards until you exit the scenario and finish the level. I didn't play The Sky's Fallen for too long, around 30 minutes of play, and I found it to be pretty monotonous after a while. Anyways, nice colourful visuals and music by legendary Richard Bayliss. 5.75% is collectively what the game is voted at. Admittedly, I've never played my life up until recording this video. I bought it when it released, and to my surprise, this is actually a very addictive game. The aim of my life is very simple: stomp on the small objects until they have disappeared, which then creates letters. Once this has been achieved, the door opens for the next stage. It's not as simple as this though. While stomping, the player needs to avoid being hit by various sprites that are out to get you. One thing that stood out the most with my life is the music. Superb soundtrack on this game. I am honestly surprised this one only earned itself a 5.8% over at Lemon. Originally a Commodore VIC-20 game, Super Carlin the Spider made its way to the Commodore 64 complete with enhancements. The premise is simple but effective, which makes for a fairly addictive single-screen platformer. Super Carlin the Spider is very nice to control. The aim of this game is to collect all the goodies whilst avoiding the nasties. Springs and such are something to watch out for too. These are there to help you collect things, but can also fling you into enemies. Well worth checking out if you prefer single screen platformers. 6% is the score for Carlin. Originally produced back in 1994, the coders of Flubble Squidge found it difficult to find a publisher to publish the game at the time. Of course, by 1994, Commodore would collapse and most kids at the time would move on to consoles ranging from the Super Nintendo to the Sega Mega Drive, and that's not to mention the original PlayStation coming. Codemasters and Psytronik were contacted but both declined. Eventually, it was handed over to Jason McKenzie of Psytronik and was released as a public domain title. It was then given a full Psytronik release in 2013, complete with enhancements. Gameplay wise, it is a platformer, and to be honest, I didn't know how to play this one. It does look to be a good game though, with a Creatures and Mayhem in Monsterland style to it. 6.33%. This is one of my favourite Psytronik releases by far. Eye of the Gods was played a lot when it originally came out. Aesthetically, the developer appears to be going for an old school look, which looks very simplistic, but damn, this game plays well. A Metroidvania style platformer where you must wander around scrolling screens looking for power-ups which will allow you to progress further into the game. It's one of those games where at some point you are begging for health, otherwise your fate is start right from the start again. I would likely say that Eye of the Gods is personally right up there for me for the modern C64 era. 6.55%. Volkers and Story are back with another release, and get used to those names. This pair of genius programmers create some of the very best modern C64 games. The Vice Squad is clearly imitating Miami Vice, and if you watch my Ocean videos you would have seen or remember how bad that game really was. The music in Vice Squad is amazing, and gameplay wise I am not a huge fan of it, and think that Volkers and Story have produced much better titles with Psytronik. If you were into horizontal racing shooters, almost like Spy Hunter style, then the Vice Squad is certainly for you. 6.75% is what Lemners thought of this 2013 release. I think the Mandela effect is happening with this game. I could have sworn this was originally titled Bear Aware, but the artwork states it is titled Sleepwalker, not to be confused with the Ocean Software's final game in 1992 for comic relief though. Talking of the Ocean release, this game is very similar. Guide the bear through dangers lurking on the screen and help him get into bed. Sleepwalker almost reminds me of a ZX Spectrum style game. Gameplay wise, it's not a bad game, but I am not a fan of the music. 6.2% for Bear Aware. I mean, Sleepwalker. As some of you might be aware, I am not a big fan of puzzlers. Phase Out is a puzzler. The concept seems unique though, and the music is fantastic. It's a game of rotating stones to match colours, but gets more complex as the game progresses. Phase Out was originally intended for the 2013 RGCD 16KB competition, but instead had a full release. Lemoners who voted on Phase Out scored it a 6.5%. This is quite literally the only Psytronik game that I don't own, and so I have used a trailer to take place of its gameplay. It's of course a basketball game, which just like Argos, a very unusual genre for this day and age. People tend to like this game judging from YouTube gameplay reviews. However, Lemners voted jam it as a 7%.
Is that all you got?
Space Trip is a platformer shooter which sees you taking control over ships that have been captured by aliens. Your mission is to defeat the aliens and take control back over for each ship that you enter. Some ships have multiple floors to search for the aliens. You can even hack the ships by randomly using your credit card. Space Trip 2086 is a decent game, but does get challenging. Visually it has a simple style, but the game itself is almost flawless. This one is highly recommended, 7.17% by the Lemon community. This game was originally entered for the 2012 RGCD 16KB cartridge competition, where it came second place. It later got a full enhanced retail release as a physical game. Assembloids was a very popular game when it released, and it wasn't until yesterday that I played it for the very first time. It really is an addictive game. Each time a tile that resembles a face appears, you must press on D-pad to slot it into a space to create a face whilst earning points. It's very addictive and we'll see you coming back for more, 7.25%. To start with, when you begin this game, you might wonder if your controller is plugged into the right port, as the snake you are controlling doesn't seem very responsive to your controller input. You then suddenly realise that by waiting for the snake to face the direction you were aiming for, moves that direction by pressing the action button or tapping it. It is a very unique control implementation for the C64, and it is a fairly addictive game too. Just collect objects and wait for the goal to open. PO Snake is simplistic yet very good visually and cleverly designed. PO Snake earns itself a 7.38%. I am honestly not much of a golf fan, but a golf game for the Commodore 64 of this day and age is very rare. Its control mechanics are impressive and its simplistic gameplay makes it pretty fun to play. By holding action button determines the power of your golf club swing. You also have many different planets to play golf on, such as Mars and others. Many Lemon users love this game, which is why they collectively score it a 7.79%. No, not Guns N' Roses, Guns and Ghosts. This is a story and Rottensteiner game that had me hooked when it released back in 2013. When I had the free time in the evenings, I was pretty busy back then looking after young people. The premise is to kill zombies and other nasties that dominate single screens. Not as easy as it looks. You have a shotgun initially with just 2 shells. Once these are used, it takes time to reload. This changes later in the game with power-ups, which includes faster shell loading times. A nice touch is the flashes on the screen while shooting. It's a great title as well as a fairly long game. I am not surprised that it scored so highly with an impressive 7.87%. I have always had a soft spot for Pac-Man worlds. Yes, the character you control is a Pac-Man ripoff, but the game itself is much different. Collect keys to open up new rooms whilst collecting tons of fruit and sweets. You have around 8 lives to start the game with, and trust me, these lives go fairly soon, and at some point you will be praying to come across a 1-up life. It's got a fantastic soundtrack by Sawcross to go with it too. Definitely up there for one of my own personal recommendations. It's a simple arcade collectible that is bright and very addictive. 7.92% is well worth the score for Pac-Man Worlds. Darkness is one of my favourite Psytronik releases. It's a top-down adventure in the same vein as the ZX Spectrum game, Sabrewulf. The work of Volker's story again, this is a very large world to explore and finds you hunting down keys and other bits to unlock areas to progress. Anybody familiar with Sabrewulf by Ultimate Play the Game from the 80s will see a familiarity in Darkness. It is a one-life affair, and it can be very punishing, but if you make it to the end of the game, the boss fight and the size of the boss is very impressive, and so did most Lemoners say so when this game released back in 2014. If you can, grab the special collector's edition of this, which features all the goodies including the audio CD, poster and stickers. Awesome game that deserves its 7.4% score. It's another puzzler. Ignore my gameplay footage and focus on the matter at hand here. The theory is to navigate your adventure past the mummies and exit levels through the doors. I made it to the second stage and that's when I just simply gave up. Oddly reminds me of a game of chess for some reason. If you enjoy puzzlers, then without a doubt then, Maze of the Mummy is just for you. Each turn you take, the enemy takes a move too. I just wish puzzlers was my thing because this title seems very good. 7.5% is the score for Maze of the Mummy. Originally a perk for the Kickstarter of the Chris Wilkins book, Commodore 64 in Pixels, the book went on to achieve £47,000 in Kickstarter pledges by 1,164 backers. Anyways, Psytronik a little later went on to publish it officially, which I bought at the time. It came in one of those small style C64 boxes from back in the day and had a cassette tape of the game inside. Something very nostalgic about this release. The game itself seems fair. One one day I will manage to get somewhere with Barnsley Badger. One of the standout points is its ZX Spectrum-esque aesthetic and the Monty on the Run theme. Great music too. The Lemon people vote Barnsley with an impressive 7.5%. The version of Aviator Arcade 2 that I am playing is actually a preview version released a little while back on itch.io. I wasn't sure what to expect. Games like this are to a penny, but this one is exceptional. Kinda reminds me of Swiv, a top-down scrolled shooter which features many different levels and some challenging boss fights in the game. Normally I have found boss fights on C64 games easy most of the time, but this game is slightly different. The first game was released as a public domain game a year prior to Psytronik publishing this one. 8% is what the Lemners score this one at. Now, from a technical standpoint, Slipstream is very impressive in terms of its 8-bit implementation of 3D vector graphics, which move at a fairly fast pace too. Remember, the C64 features a 1982 processor running at just under 1 MHz with a tiny amount of RAM too. I would obviously compare Slipstream to Super Nintendo's Starwing, the same idea but obviously with less on the visual side of things. The aim is simple: line up your crosshair with enemies, press fire and then destroy them. I would imagine by using the Super CPU via Vice emulator, you could likely get Slipstream running better if cranking up the speed just a notch. 8% is a great score and a great bit of coding from the programmers. So who remembers Jetpack on the ZX Spectrum? This is likely the closest you will get to it on the Commodore 64. Rocket Smash X sees you play as an astronaut that needs to build the spaceship to progress further into the game by collecting parts of your ship which drops down from the top of the screen. Simply move into the fallen pieces and drop them to build your ship. You then need to refuel your ship until it completely goes a particular colour, also blasting your way past nasties whilst doing this. A highly fun and addictive title that deserves its 8.2% score over at Lemon 64. Rocket Smash was also originally a competitor for the RGCD 16KB competition of 2013. Although it didn't win the competition, it won many fans and it is utterly a great game. And so the winner of games released by Psytronik between 2013 and 2017 goes to Hesium. In the same style as the famous Commodore 64 Metal Warrior series, this platformer shooter is heavily reliant on reading the storyline as the game goes, which is also science fiction based. I'll be honest, I haven't invested much time into Hesium, but I bought a special edition box set of this from Psytronik on its release, which came with soundtrack on CD and a poster. It seems to be a game that will be very rewarding once understanding how it plays. Nevertheless, Lemoners seem to love this release and collectively score it with a whopping 9.08%. And finally, I'm going to mention X-Force. Sometimes, not too often, it takes Lemon64 some time to upload information onto its game's database. Sadly, X-Force is one of them games for some reason. I am of course mention this space shoot 'em up because it is a standalone Psytronik release, and I know that games in the style of R-Type is very popular. This is one of my personal favourites too. As it has no information on the Lemon64 database, I am going to honorary mention this game and personally score it as an 8%. It's addictive and one of the better modern scrolling screen space shooters for the C64. Check out X-Force.